Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Case Uncovered, where we uncover the most compelling and lesser known cases while lifting up the voices of the missing, the murdered, and the families still fighting for answers. I'm Jen Rivera, and today we're continuing our coverage of the disappearance of Charlotte Heimann. Through DNA, professional forensic searches, and independent methods, Charlotte's granddaughter Shyla followed evidence that kept pointing back to the same area of land. By the end of that episode, the picture was starting to come together. But direction isn't resolution, because knowing where to look doesn't mean the truth will automatically be acknowledged or acted on. In this episode, we're picking up right where we left off. The land has been cleared, the search has continued, and the findings raised serious questions, not just about what may be there, but about how this case has been handled once that information existed. You'll continue to hear directly from Shyla, Charlotte's granddaughter, as she walks through what happened next, the return to the property, what was found, and what followed after. Because sometimes the most important part of an investigation isn't just what's uncovered, it's what happens after. Once Dutch gave a full sit, there was no ambiguity about what that meant. For search teams, a full alert signals the possible presence of human remains. And at that point, the responsibility shifts. Because when that kind of alert happens, the next steps are no longer optional, they're procedural. That notification mattered, because from that moment on, this wasn't just a family-led search. It was a potential crime scene.
So after the partial sit and the divining rods reacting, we had to leave. At this point, we didn't have, anything else to go off of because the land wasn't cleared, so we couldn't get a full hit. Before we left the land, Michael did use the gizmo again, which is the physio-electrical device. Again, he used it with Richard Akers' DNA. He was able to get a positive reaction right there, exactly where K9 Dutch was hitting. Then after that, we went back and I gave all of that information to the police.
What Shyla is describing here is careful, responsible action. Nothing was rushed, nothing was hidden, and nothing was done outside of proper channels. The expectation was simple, that law enforcement would take over.
Beth and I were in Rochester for the second search. Beth and I were followed by Jimmy Shannon. We have video footage of him following us. So we were coming off the I-390 onto Latta Road. There were two left turn lanes. We were in the far right left turn lane, and Jimmy was in the left turn lane. There was one car to the left of us, and Jimmy was behind that car. So in the video, I started recording as Jimmy purposely was trying to stay behind us when the light turned green instead of go the speed limit. And the car that was in front of us went as normal speed. The car in front of him went as normal speed. So he should have been hundreds of feet before us because we slowed down to make sure he would pass us because we didn't want him following us anymore. So then he started driving slow. So it was us driving next to him awkwardly for a moment. And then he sped up and got right in front of Beth and I to make it look like we were following him. And then he had to speed back over to the left lane because it's a double lane on Ladder Road. So we were in that right lane. He was in the left lane. He sped toward us, got over, saw a mailman, had to swerve back over to the left lane, speed more, and get back over. I don't know if he was trying to intimidate us, but it wasn't really intimidating. We did get it on video. After July 14th, there was also a situation that I want to make note of because whether or not people want to agree with this, there are lawsuits going on against Greece police for putting trackers on people's car and following people. So on July 14th at 8:15 p.m., an officer from Greece police started following Beth and I before the left turn to get on I-390. The officer pretended to get on 390 and then he proceeded to let one car get between us. And then the officer failed to stop for a beige minivan that was literally broken down in the middle of the road, and he continued to follow us instead of stopping to help this civilian. He continued to follow us, so we knew we were being followed at that point. Instead of turning right into our hotel because we didn't want anybody to know where we were staying, we also stay in a different hotel every single time for that reason. He followed us all the way to Home Depot, where he then turned left, and we kept going straight because we figured if we continued to drive straight into Rochester, the actual city, he wouldn't be able to follow us out of his jurisdiction. So that was pretty scary. And I wanted to make note of that because we saw him follow us and he followed us for a good 2 miles. And again, it was weird that he didn't even stop for that broken down car. Instead, he continued to follow us. We went back to Ohio on July 14th in the middle of the night. The reason we went back in the middle of the night is because after Jimmy had followed us and after the Greece police had followed us, Beth and I felt very uneasy. We felt that it wasn't honestly safe for us to be in that area because of what we were finding and because of the actions of people around us. So we decided to leave. So we left and drove all the way home, 9 hours in the middle of the night, and got home at 4 a.m. I woke up the next morning at 8 a.m. to a phone call from Captain Bello. And he asked me, what had happened. He asked me about the search. I explained to him what we had found. And he asked me to give him a report. So I gave him the report from Michael after Michael had updated it, because at this point it was only 2 days after the search and after the partial hit. So we had to wait a couple of days for Michael to type up the report. Michael did it as fast as possible. He was able to get me the report on, I think it was July 16th. And when he got the report, I sent it to Rochester Police Department, and I got a call from Joe Graham as well as an email, a timestamped email stating that they had a scheduled meeting with Rochester DA on July 17th at 10 a.m. So there was a scheduled meeting to present the case to the DA from what I found, because the start of what I found in early July with the DNA and the physioelectrical device, and then the partial hit with the dog on top of that, the divining rods, they decided they were going to proceed and move forward and show the DA.
But that's not what happened. Instead of securing the scene, law enforcement chose not to excavate. No forensic team was brought in, no ground was disturbed, and no immediate follow-up search was conducted.
Well, I got a call on July 17th from Frank Umbrino yelling at me. He was not very nice, and I have him on recording yelling at me, and he told me that a partial hit is not worthy enough in the police's eyes to get a search warrant, and that they couldn't in good faith draft a search warrant on the property based on the partial hit.
For families who have been through this process, this moment is devastating, because an alert like that doesn't happen often. And when it does, it's usually followed by action.
After they told me, get the dog on the property and see what the dog does, it still wasn't enough for them. So I was very, very frustrated on July 17th. To be honest, I'm going to be really, really honest. I mentally broke on July 17th. I thought that this case was over with. I received the call from Frank Umbrino during a work day. I had just gotten back from a visit back to my agency, and that's when the call came through. So I was sitting in the parking lot at work in an agency car taking the call. And after that call, after him yelling at me and after him telling me there was nothing else that Rochester Police Department would do or could do for this case, that's when I sat in my parking lot at my agency and I broke down and I cried, because at that point I thought it was over.
What's important to understand here is that this wasn't a single data point. It wasn't one dog on one day. It was months of work, layered evidence, and independent confirmation. And yet, the decision was made not to proceed. That decision would have consequences because when evidence isn't acted on in the moment, time doesn't stop. Land changes, conditions change, and opportunities are lost. Now, just because law enforcement chose not to move forward, the search didn't end. It stalled. And for families, that distinction matters because stall doesn't mean resolved. It means unanswered. With no movement from law enforcement, the only option left was to keep documenting, keep advocating, and prepare for the possibility that if answers were ever going to come, they might not come quickly.
So I called my sister and I told her, she needed to get to my house because I wasn't okay and that I was upset and angry and that everything was over. And I let her know that I was going to reveal everything on social media right then and there on July 17th because I was done. I didn't know where we were going to go from here. So my sister told me to calm down. Thankfully for her, I did calm down. And from there, she was like, look, what we need to do is like rethink what we're going to do, replan. And, if we can get Jake Fabry to give us permission to get on the land again, we can get the land cleared and hopefully the dog can go back out.
But pushing forward came with consequences because time doesn't pause while decisions are delayed. And eventually, the opportunity to search the land again would change.
So we had been in communication with Jake Fabry, since early July. It was after July 7th. So on July 17th, Jake Fabry was texting me back and forth. We had some phone communication as well. So we were planning on when he was going to clear the land, how he was going to clear the land so that the Shannon family didn't know that he was helping us. I swore to Jake that I would not tell anybody. I would not post about it, about going to the land. And I did make a promise to Jake Fabry, and I told him that if we did not find anything, that I would publicly apologize to the Shannon family. Okay, this was July 17th. So Jake Fabry sent me a photo on July 17th and asked if I knew the person in the photo. I let him know that I did not. The person in the photo had binoculars and a disposable camera in her hands. I asked him who the person was and that I promised that I would not send a person with binoculars or a disposable camera to his house. So he was like, no, I know that you wouldn't. I'll call you after work and let you know. So I guess he didn't want to put it in text, which I understand, and he wanted to explain it over the phone. So he let me know that her name is Melissa Whitney. He reported to me that Melissa Whitney showed up on the side of the road 2 years ago to his property, and the picture that he had taken of her was right where she had pulled off the side of the road. And he reported to me that he approached her to ask her what she was taking pictures of and why she was looking at his land back in the woods. And she reported, quote, "There's bodies buried on this land and I'm going to prove it," quote. So police were called, and because Jake was like, what the hell is going on? So Jake called the police, and the police told Jake Fabry that Melissa Whitney is mentally unstable, which I personally believe is a running motive and a running theme for Rochester Police Department and Greece Police Department to report that anybody that is anywhere near the Shannon family or that property on Long Pond and Janes Road involved at all, anybody thinking that there's something wrong with that property or the people on the property is automatically labeled mentally unstable or unhinged. I want to make this important because I think that the case itself was dismissed and neglected because of this stigma and this report of mental illness in Charlotte, which also led to the police just now stating everybody is mentally unstable that goes after the Shannon family. So they reported that Charlotte was mentally unstable, Melissa Whitney's mentally unstable, and now there is a recording of Frank Umbrino telling me personally that I needed to get help. And when I told him, because I was laughing, I said, "It's funny that you tell me that I need to get help because I'm looking into something, but you also said that about Melissa Whitney and my grandmother. And then Frank backtracked and he said that he was telling me I needed to get help coming to the terms with we're never going to solve the case, which also is pretty shitty of Frank Umbrino to state, because cases can be solved any point, any time. And it's proven that cases have been solved over 40 years in other cases. So to tell me that the case is never going to be solved, and to tell me that I mentally need help is pretty wrong of Frank Umbrino, I feel. I feel the stigma around mental health in that department is very wrong, uneducated, and it's been that way for decades since my grandmother went missing. That is a important thing that I want noted, is all of this, all of the people are mentally unstable when they're alleging this.
By October, there was still no movement by law enforcement. But of course, time didn't stop moving. In investigations like this, timing matters, not emotionally, practically, because land doesn't preserve evidence, it absorbs it.
From July 17th until October 10th, there was radio silence between me and Rochester Police Department and me and Greece Police Department. The only communication that I had from July 17th until October 10th was between Michael Hadsel at Peace River Canine Search and Rescue and Jake Fabry, the owner of the property. The reason being is we were planning, I don't want to call it planning an attack for the property, but we were planning strategically how to get the canine Dutch back onto the property after the property was cleared and the land was cleared by Jake Fabry, so that we could get the full hit on the property. July to October sounds like a really long time, and the explanation from July to October is simply because Michael Hadsel had a surgery and he had to recover from the surgery and he was unable to travel. And I refused to hire or search for a different canine search and rescue team for many reasons. One, I trusted Michael. Two, I was not going to sit and let the police state if I brought in another team that I brought in another team because I wasn't supportive of Michael or didn't think that Michael was correct, or Michael said something that I didn't agree with, because that wasn't true. I absolutely wanted to get back on that land right then and there back in July. I couldn't. I had to respect the fact that Michael had surgery. He also had other searches that were already pre-scheduled, and he takes time out of his life to help my grandmother's case. Of course, I'm going to respect the searches that he already had scheduled. So we did not get back onto the property until October 9th. But this was all pre-planned. The silence from July to October wasn't because we were lacking evidence, which the police thought. The police thought that I was done. The police thought that I had given up in July, but I didn't. So from July to October, we continued our search of just figuring out all of the pieces and putting all the pieces together and getting our photo evidence and all of the articles and whatnot that we could for the case. And on August 25th, Jake had the land cleared and he had sent me pictures of the land being cleared. So all of the foliage was gone and the land was completely flat. In October, we went back to Rochester and we had spoken to Jake, and he was not there, unfortunately, but his dad was. So Jake's dad was there for the whole entire search and the dig. So on October 9th, we went back to the property and met Jake's dad, and he let us back on the property and led the dog, right back to that spot. So then Michael got the dog out of the car and did his thing, and the dog hit instantly. We knew the dog was going to hit, and I thought the dog was going to hit based on the partial hit back in July, and here we are in October, and the dog fully hit 100%. So that was exciting. It was scary. It was a moment of all of the emotions at once, because I didn't know that we were going to get this far, and I didn't know that we were going to find anything, this far down in the decades.
What makes Charlotte Heiman's case especially difficult is that the opportunity was there. Access was granted, evidence aligned, professional alerts were confirmed. This wasn't a lack of information, it was a lack of action.
The dog hit, and then after the hit, Dr. Vass. So Dr. Vass was here for the October dig. He has been behind the scenes since May when I got Michael Hadsel involved in the case. He is the forensic anthropologist that works with Michael. He is the one that also created the physioelectrical device. His name is Arpad Vass, and there are negative reviews on him on the internet, and there are positive reviews on the internet. And some people discredit him because there was a really bad article that was written about him. But so Dr. Voss came with in October to the dig. I met him in person. It was really exciting to have him there to be able to help us with the dig. So after K9 hit, Dr. Voss pulled out his physioelectrical device. He again had a new sample from my Uncle Richard, just a fresh sample of, fingernails and hair. He used it and it hit right where K9 Dutch was sitting. He then used that device, and so he could use that device for different elements and chemicals and things like that. So he was putting different elements and chemicals in the device and hitting it towards the area. So it tested positive for titanium, which Charlotte had titanium in her knee from her knee surgery. It continued to test positive for titanium throughout the entire day on October 10th, which means we never got it out of the ground. So he tested for all the chemicals that break you down as a person when you decompose. So identified during the scan of the site, it was positive for Caucasian bone. It was negative for African bone, Hispanic bone, and fresh bone. It was positive for dry bone in minimal amounts. And it was positive for bone ash / dust, which is what the dry bone breaks down to, is bone ash. So that is a very, very decomposed, has been there a long time body. It was also positive for palmitic acid, stearic acid, oleic acid, myristic acid, acetone, chloroform, styrene, carbon disulfide, dimethyl disulfide, and then it was positive for sulfur dioxide, hexane, carbon techchloride, which is specifically a human-specific marker. Carbon tetrachloride. It's a specific human marker. And the hexane is specific to bone ash. And then toluene, I believe I'm saying that right. That also confirms bone ash, which was present. It was also positive for dichlorofluoromethane and ethylbenzene decanal nonal, bilirubin, titanium, and it was negative for lime. So all of those chemicals were positive in the site, which led Dr. Voss to believe that a human decomposed there. However, we also pulled out adipocere. Adipocere is a grave wax-like substance. So when you break down into the soil, so I personally witnessed it. I personally held it in my own hands. It looks like marshmallows, mini marshmallows in the soil. So there were spots of it. So you break down to adipocere, and Dr. Voss was pulling it out, and we kept pulling it out. But after 5 hours, we couldn't dig any deeper or wider because the ground would have fell through and the excavator would have fell through. So we had to stop after 5 hours. So we got as much adipocere and as many of the samples of bone ash that we could get. And it was unfortunately not enough to pull human DNA out of it, but that does not negate the fact that all of the chemicals were positive for the human decomp. it also doesn't negate the fact that the canine did a full hit and there was positive titanium that we didn't pull out of the soil. On top of that, we needed to go wider towards the woods area because that is where more of the activity was. However, we started farther to the right because of the ground penetrating radar. So the ground penetrating radar picked up a disturbance 4 to 7 feet below the surface. So it was able to show that there was a disturbance 4 to 7 feet. Now you think like, oh, somebody's not going to hand bury somebody more than 3 feet, right? Well, you have to think about the land, you have to think about the area, and you have to think about equipment. So this land was right next to a creek. The creek bed was dug out multiple times. Okay. So adding feet of dirt on top of it, all of the drying out of the land and flooding of the land over and over again for 44 years brought feet of of they call it sandy loam and silt type dirt is what they decided on the soil sample, Dr. Voss and Michael. So loam, and it's not really a great soil type. So when we started digging, the roots that we were digging up, Michael and Dr. Voss both looked at them and they said, these roots aren't 40 years old. These roots that we're standing at 2 feet down, these are like 10 years old. 10 years. So you have to think about that. 2 feet down, we were only 10 years into tree roots. Okay. We needed to go way deeper. And Michael and Dr. Voss both agreed they believe she's about 10 feet down because of all of this. So we only got 5 foot down. And we were finding more of the adipocere and the bone ash to the side that we needed to keep digging further. And the titanium kept hitting right there on the side. And on top of all of that, Canine Dutch was used throughout the whole dig, and he kept alerting to the soil we were pulling out, the adipocere that we were pulling out, the bone ash, and kept sitting on the pile of dirt that we kept pulling out with the excavator. So all of those things lead us to believe that we need to go back and we need to dig more. I do want to back up before the dig. After we got all those positive chemicals and hits, Michael and us, we met as a team and asked Jake Fabry's dad, like, can we move forward with the dig? Well, Jake said that if the dog sat, that we were given permission to dig. So I paid out of my own pocket $500 for an excavator. So we went to Home Depot. We picked up the excavator. We had some technical difficulties with the excavator because the technician there couldn't get one of the lights to work, so they had to give me a different excavator. That excavator ended up having a claw, which was not useful in digs. If anybody knows anything about digs, you're supposed to have a flat blade. We had to work with what we had. We had to work with that day. That's all we had. I wasn't going to say no dig because we had a claw versus a smooth blade. So we went with the claw and we brought it back to the property, and Jake's dad ran that excavator for 5 hours. So I have 5 hours of GoPro footage. I have 5 hours of body cam footage, all the recordings of the voices and all of the things that we found for 5 hours. But after 5 hours, they called it quits. There was nothing more we could do at that point. We had to not give up, but we had to end the search. So after that, before the dig, I actually called Greece Police Department and Rochester Police Department. I did not let them know I was coming until I was physically on the property and the excavator was in the background. I then called them with the excavator beeping in the background and said, I am currently at the property of 1040 Janes Road. I was given permission to search the property, and we are now digging because a full hit from the canine was positive. If you guys would like to join us, you can come join us. We will be here all day. Greece Police Department did not show up. Rochester Police Department did not show up. They didn't send a patrol car. They didn't send a detective. They didn't send anybody to represent either of their departments to make sure we were doing everything all right, to make sure we weren't doing anything wrong. Nothing. It was all on us. And they had that opportunity to show up at any point. So after the dig, we brought all of the evidence back to the police, of course, and I demanded a search warrant, and I demanded that they go out there and dig further, because at that point, how much more evidence did they need to get back on there? Like, really, that's my question. So at this point, after we got the dig and after we got the positive hit with the canine, it was back to being Greece Police's case. So now I was pushed back to Rochester Police Department, or pushed from Rochester Police Department back to Greece. So then my point of contact was Sergeant Dill and Detective DeMarco as of October. So they were working the case with me, and they took the report from the dig and all of the findings that we had, and they took it to the medical examiner in Monroe County. And they told me that because of the science that I used and the technology that I used is so fresh that they needed to correspond with other doctors and forensic anthropologists to back the science on the physioelectrical device. So I was like, fine, whatever, I'll give you time for that. So then a couple days go by, and they said that they were still waiting on the medical examiner. So I then was like, what are you waiting on for the medical examiner? And they're like, he needs to look over this and talk with his colleagues about the science that you used. And I said, okay, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. So then I personally called the Monroe County medical examiner myself and spoke with him. He told me on October 28th, he told me that we were not waiting on him, and in fact that he had already told Monroe County, back up. The Monroe County medical examiner had already told Greece Police Department that there was nothing he could do based on that report because there's no body. There's not a body to like examine, right? Okay, we have bone ash, we have adipose here. That's not a body. So he was like, I don't know what Greece Police expects out of me, but I'm done with my report. So then this was October 28th. I called Sergeant Dill and Detective DeMarco and left them a voicemail, letting them know that I was pretty frustrated that we waited an extra week and a half for this so-called review of the report. And here we are, the medical examiner saying that the holdup wasn't him. So October 29th, I get a call from Detective DeMarco because Sergeant Dill was out of the office, of course. Just so happened to be out of the office the rest of the week. So DeMarco calls me and says, hey, I just wanted to let you know that we got approval from New York State to bring 2 canines from New York State and run on the property. And I was like, weird. That's weird that happened the day after I called the medical examiner and asked him what the holdup was. And then all of a sudden you have permission to run 2 state dogs. Okay. And then he backtracked and he was like, this has been in the works for a while. It just takes a while to get things approved. I do understand that with the government, but it doesn't add up. So it seemed like I made that call. I called their bluff and then they took action without a plan, really. So October 29th, he said, well, we're going out there with New York State in an hour. And I said, well, that's great for you to tell me that this was in the works, knowing I'm 9 hours away and I can't physically be there. I said, are you guys wearing body cameras? Detective DeMarco told me that they don't wear body cameras, but he thinks that the state boys should have body cameras on. He thinks, but he doesn't wear a body camera. And I said, DeMarco, you know why I'm asking you this. You know I don't trust you guys, and I have distrust with the system right now because of how they handled her case. I told DeMarco that it's not personal against him, but I said, look, you know that why I have distrust, and you have to understand it. And he said, no, I get it. And I said, you're the one, DeMarco, that told me that this should be a Netflix series. And he said, I still think it should be a Netflix series. So DeMarco was like, okay, well, we'll be out there in an hour. And I said, fine, I'll have somebody on the sidewalk. Bet is what I said. And then he was like, Shyla, don't have anybody out on the sidewalk. You don't want to piss off the New York State Police. And I said, well, I mean, like, I would like to be there to make sure you guys don't lie to me. So then I was like, fine, I won't have the media there, but I'm going to have somebody there on the sidewalk. So I called my cousin Phil that lives in Rochester, and I said, Phil, within an hour, New York State Police is going to the property. I need you to get there, and I need you to record the whole situation. So Phil said, on it. He gets to the sidewalk and he confirms. Phil confirmed that the police were out there. I was told by Detective DeMarco, quote, that it was going to be a covert plan of action to get to the property so that the Shannon family did not know that the state dogs were out there. That is what I was told by Detective DeMarco. And that is what Jake Fabry was told by the police too. And that is why Jake Fabry gave the state police permission to go on his property again to run the state dogs, as long as they stayed quiet and as long as it didn't look like he was helping the investigation, because in the end, he has to live next to these people. Back in July, Jake told me, he said, the reason I'm giving you permission to get on my property is because if he is a murderer, I don't want myself or my kids living next to him for the rest of our lives. And if he's not a murderer, I have to live next to him for the rest of my life, knowing that I helped you solve or look into him as an alleged murderer, then I have to live next to him. So I understood Jake's position. Well, I get a call from Jake or I get a text from Jake and I get a call from my cousin Phil. The police didn't go in quiet. They came in with lights on, like marked vehicles, not unmarked vehicles. There was only one unmarked vehicle. The rest had grease police on them, had lights flashing. It was not a secret in the neighborhood that the police were searching the land. So they were out there for about 45 minutes, and all I can confirm is that they did in fact go to the property. So I get a call, not from Detective DeMarco. I get a call from the captain of Greece an hour after they went out there, and he calls me and tells me, there's nothing more that we can do for you. Neither one of the state dogs hit. And I said, what? You're telling me neither of the state dogs hit? And he said, nope, neither of them. There's not a scent of human bodies. And I said, okay, sir, are you going to let me see that body cam footage? The answer was no. They are not going to let me see the body cam footage to show me and to shut me up and to end my investigation that the state dogs didn't hit. Because I truly believe that they had the dogs to go out there, and I truly believe the dogs did hit. And I truly believe that they are covering it up. Again, this is my perspective on how things are unfolding, but they won't give me or let me even come view the footage of the dogs not hitting. You would think that with them knowing the publicity that I'm getting on the case, and with them knowing that I'm very vocal about this case, that they would let me see the footage to stop my investigation, to stop me from moving forward or progressing or whatnot. Nothing. So October 29th, they called and said there's nothing more they can do for me, is what Greece police. So that was the end of that. The 44-year anniversary of Charlotte going missing was the next day. The very next day. The audacity of them and I swear they could have, there's no way that was the end all date that had to happen. The dogs had to go out the day before Charlotte's anniversary. No way. I think they did it to prove a point, and they sure did prove a point. So on October 30th, on her 44-year anniversary, the day that I was hoping to talk about all the progress that we made on the case and how far we had come and all the good things about Charlotte and reminiscing. Instead, I was in a depressed state where I barely even wanted to talk about her anniversary. I wanted to post so much about her anniversary and a long post about, her story, and I didn't even get to that point. I posted like maybe a 30-second video of a recording of myself just so people knew that, yeah, I'm aware that it's her 44-year anniversary, but I was pretty depressed because of the negligence and how far we've come. And to top the cherry, not a single investigator, detective, PR guy, anybody involved from Rochester Police or Greece Police, none of them called on the day of her anniversary. Did I expect them to call every year for 44 years? No, and they haven't. But I did expect them to call this year, knowing that this case blew up, knowing that the day before they sent New York State dogs to the property. I thought they would at least call and say, "Hey, we're thinking of you today. Hey, we're sorry that we can't move forward. We're thinking of you." Nothing. Not a single call from any of them. Since October 29th, I received one single phone call. On November 4th, I received a phone call from Joe Graham, the homicide detective from Rochester Police Department. Because after Greece decided to back out, again, they pushed the case back to Rochester Police Department. They state this case is going to continue to be an active cold case over at Rochester Police Department, but Greece Police is closing out their case involving this property. So on November 4th, I get a call from Joe Graham, and I also have this on recording. He's telling me that Rochester Police Department interviewed my grandfather, Raymond Shannon. So they went out and interviewed the man, and the first thing Joe Graham had to tell me was he didn't want a lawyer. He wanted to talk a lot. He was super nice and inviting, and he was a very genuine guy. So he started out the conversation with all of the good things about Raymond Shannon, which automatically, okay, slap the not a suspect on his forehead already. So Joe Graham told me that they went out and talked to Raymond, and Raymond admitted that he worked in a bunch of bars and a bunch of nightclubs in the 70s and 80s, and that he was very prominent, and he also was very known to take women home. He told the investigators that he would take women home, sometimes women that he didn't even know their name. He stated to the investigators that he saw a picture of my grandmother via Facebook on one of my posts. He recalls that, or he does not recall the picture looking familiar to him. Charlotte does not look familiar, but he did confirm and tell investigators that he could be my grandfather because he slept with a lot of women in the 80s, and he brought a lot of women that he knew and did not know home. So after that, Joseph Graham said, since he admitted that he could be your grandfather and that he did work in clubs and does not have a criminal record, he's not a suspect. We have nothing to go on to prove that your grandfather murdered your grandmother. Again, I allegedly believe that he murdered my grandmother. Back in July, when I met with Joseph Graham, Rochester Police Department ended up telling me the man that came looking for her the day or on or about the time she disappeared at Rochester Psychiatric Hospital was found, supposedly. He was identified, and Rochester Police Department claimed that they interviewed him, and they claim that he's also not a suspect because they claim that the man admitted that he came to the psychiatric hospital looking for my grandmother so that he could bum some money off of her to go buy drugs because he was a drug addict. So Rochester police deemed him now in 2025 not a suspect because although he was involved in drugs and my grandmother in 1981, he has no criminal record since. So they're basing this all on nobody with criminal records since the 80s could be deemed a suspect. So on November 4th, Joseph Graham told me there was nothing more that they could do for me and that it's done. We're done with everything. So that's where I'm at.
Charlotte Heimann's case is not closed, and it shouldn't be. What remains is evidence that pointed somewhere specific, a search that confirmed it mattered, and a family that did everything right. What remains now is the truth, waiting to be acknowledged, and the reminder that time should never be allowed to outrun responsibility. Charlotte's story deserves more than silence, and her family deserves more than unanswered questions.
We have to continue the fight and sharing the story, or else the people that know something will continue to forget, or to be honest, they're dying off. I mean, we're talking about people in their 70s now. So that's an issue that we're dealing with, and why it's so important to keep chugging along, because people are dying. So my next step, I do want to add. So what frustrates me is my grandma's case. Yeah, it has a lot of blanks and a lot of unknowns, but my grandma's case still matters, just like all the other cold cases that they've chose to solve. I am a very big advocate, and I am so very happy that these families were able to get justice. Speaking of Wendy Jerome and the other ones in Rochester, my issue and my frustration is that investigator Seth Carr has chosen which cold cases to work on, and which he has enough evidence to win something or to complete his victory, but does not work on the cases that he believes is ever going to be solved or has a lack of evidence. And he had stated that there's nothing to go on. But then when you look at his or listen to his podcast, when you listen to all of the episodes that Seth Carr is on, you can hear how he talks about what's the first step in an investigation. His answer is you start at the beginning. Why didn't he start at the beginning on my grandma's case when he overlooked the case back in April when we had communication? Why was he so hesitant? Why was he so defensive with me when he's been working on all these other cold cases and solving them and getting on podcasts and getting on A&E? But why not my grandma's case? Like, she's important as well. So I think that that's frustrating to me, is that he picks and chooses what cases to solve based on the evidence that is available. But jumping back to your question, what's next? So this may sound super odd, because this is bizarre to me as well. So when we went back in October to do the dig, the day after the dig, my great grandmother Sylvia Heimann passed away. Sylvia Heimann is Ralph Heimann's wife, which Ralph Heimann is Charlotte's dad. He is 94 years old. So we were in Rochester and we did the dig, and unfortunately she had COVID and she died the day after the dig. Well, I came back to Rochester on the October 22nd and 23rd for her funeral. And while I was there, I met so many family members that I didn't know existed on the Hyman side of the family. Like, my great grandfather's 94. So, like, he is so sad about Charlotte's case. He doesn't talk about it that often. So I get to this funeral and I was amazed. So I knew nobody there except for my great grandfather. And all these people were coming up to me and they're like, "Are you really looking into Charlotte's case?" And I was like, "Yeah, who are you?" And, like, obviously these are all Charlotte's family, her cousins, like, that grew up side by side with Charlotte until she went missing. I finally met them. I didn't know where they were, who they were, if they were still around. So one of them, her name's Beth Dunn. She came up to me, and she is a cousin, and she said, "I had no idea you were looking into this case, and you want to know how I found out?" And I said, "How?" She said, "Because I searched the word Sylvia Hyman's obituary for Sylvia, my great grandma that died. I searched just her obituary, and all of the stuff for Charlotte popped up. That is the only reason I know that you're looking into the case." Obviously, that was big to me, because not that, oh my gosh, like, Sylvia, you died and now the family knows about the case. But that is kind of powerful to me, that, like, I didn't know this family and Sylvia's funeral brought us together. Also, this is a huge success, I feel, that's going to be helpful in the case. I met Ferris Hyman. So little did Rochester, New York know, the Heimann family, it's spelled Heimann. Okay, there's two N's. Well, little did anybody know that my great grandfather Ralph, his brother Elmer, decided to drop one of the N's because he thought it sounded too German. So he only had one N instead of two. Okay, so nobody associated this family with Charlotte because Charlotte has two N's and this Hyman, the other Hyman, only has one. So nobody thought that we were the same family line. Turns out my grandma Charlotte's cousin, Ferris Hyman, was the Monroe County Sheriff. Monroe County, New York. Monroe County, Rochester, Greece. Monroe County Sheriff. He retired recently, but he was the sheriff. But I did all of that without my family that's involved in law enforcement. So, like, I'm proud of myself for getting there, and now I'm sending him all of my evidence. He's going over all of my investigation. He's remaking the FOIL requests that I'm not a professional FOIL requester, and they know what words they need, and they will deny your FOIL request based on the silliest things. You have to be specific and know what you're asking for, or else you're not going to get it. So my FOIL request was denied. Ferris is making new FOIL requests. So part of moving forward is we're hopeful that one of these FOIL requests will go through and we can get more evidence.
As we close out this update on Charlotte Heimann's case, it's important to take a moment to acknowledge what it has taken to get here. What you've heard over these 2 episodes is not just an investigation. It's the reality of what families are often forced to carry when answers don't come easily. For Shyla, this has meant months of research, professional searches, difficult conversations, resistance, and the emotional weight of realizing that even when evidence points somewhere clearly, action isn't always guaranteed. She did what families are told to do. She followed the evidence. She involved professionals. She contacted law enforcement. And she kept going, even when the process became exhausting, frustrating, and uncertain. What stands out most is that this isn't just about closure for Shyla. It's about truth. It's about accountability. It's about making sure her grandmother's disappearance is not dismissed simply because time has passed. And it's about continuing to fight, not just for Charlotte, but for every family who has been left navigating a system that too often moves too slowly, or not at all. This is not the end of Charlotte Heimann's story, and it's not the end of Shyla's fight. If you have any information related to Charlotte Heimann's disappearance, no matter how small it may seem, you are encouraged to contact the Rochester Police Department at 585-428-6595. You can also find additional information about Charlotte's case through the Charlie Project, which provides a detailed overview of her disappearance and remains an important source for missing persons cases. I'll make sure to leave all of the links in the show notes below. Before we close today's episode, I also want to take a moment to share a bit about the Reignited Project. That's the nonprofit I founded to help families like Charlotte's. Starting in January, the Reignited Project will be expanding its work in advocacy, education, and support for families navigating the aftermath of trauma, loss, and unanswered questions. We'll be announcing new partnerships, rolling out updated resources, and launching volunteer and family support forums for those who need assistance or want to get involved. If you'd like to learn more, support our work, or stay updated, you can visit thereignitedproject.com. Our site is currently being updated with more resources becoming available in the coming weeks. You can also learn more about my work, this podcast, and my other projects by visiting jenriverainvestigates.com. And make sure to connect with me on social media. You can find me at Jen Rivera Investigates on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Thank you so much for being here today and for caring about cases like Charlotte's. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there. Fire Eyes Media.